Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Here we are at Beth Messiah again on Shabbat. Time to worship the Lord. Let's give thanks. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov ki le'olam kasdov. Adonai ki tov ki le'olam kasdov. Hodu, l'Adonai ki tov. L'Adonai ki tov. Give thanks to the Lord, He is good, His mercy forever endures. Give thanks to the Lord, He is good, His mercy forever endures. Give thanks, give thanks, give thanks, give thanks. Give thanks to the Lord, He is good. Give thanks, give thanks, give thanks, give thanks. Give thanks to the Lord, He is good. All right, folks, we're going to do things a little bit different today. So there will be no liturgy today. We're only going to have some praise and worship and I believe 2 messages going on today. So we're going to go right into the praise and worship if y'all don't mind. And if our drummer would come in or fill in. Hey guys, give this guy a hand. He not only does our work back there, but he fills in when Joshua can't be here. And he's got testimony after testimony about how God's been working with him. So if you ever get a chance to talk to him, go talk to him. Okay. All right, you ready? I will exalt you, O Lord, for you have lifted me up. You are for help, and you heal me. I will rejoice in the morning, at noon and at night. For you have shown mercy to me. mercy to me. Fill me with joy, joy, joy. You have shown mercy to me. You have shown mercy to me. I will exalt you, oh Lord, for you have lifted me up. I call to you, Lord, for help, and you heal me. I will rejoice in the morning, at noon, and at night. Oh, you have shown mercy to me. So I will dance. You have shown mercy to me. My heart will sing. You have shown mercy to me. Fill me with joy, joy, joy. You have shown mercy to me. You have shown mercy to me. My morning now. My morning now. You have turned into dancing. You removed my shroud. And now I'm clothed with joy that my heart may sing. You will not be silent, for you have shown mercy. So I will dance. You have shown mercy to me. My heart will sing. You have shown mercy to me. Fill me with joy, joy, joy. You have shown mercy to me. You have shown mercy to me. I will exalt you, oh Lord, for you have lifted me up. I go to you, Lord, for help, and you heal me. I will rejoice in the morning, at noon, and at night. For you have shown mercy to me. So I will dance. You have shown mercy to me. My heart will sing. You have shown mercy to me. Fill me with joy, joy, joy. You have shown mercy to me. You have shown mercy to me. To me. The Lord shall cause his glorious voice to be heard. He shall have a song in the night. Come to the mountain of the Lord. See his glory and his might. He's the mighty one of Israel, the mighty one of Israel. His voice shall be heard in the power of his word. He's the mighty one of Israel. The eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the sea, the ears of the deaf shall hear. The lame man shall jump and shall leap as a hart. The tongue of the dumb shall sing. He's the mighty one of Israel, the mighty one of Israel. His voice shall be heard in the power of his word. He's the mighty one of Israel. His glory, a sweet taste to be seen. Such shall bloom and rejoice. Say to them that are fearful of heart, be strong and listen to His voice. He's a mighty one of Israel, mighty one of Israel. His voice shall be heard in the power of His word. He's the mighty one of Israel. The Lord shall cause His glorious voice to be heard. You shall have a song in the night. Come to the mountain of the Lord and see His glory and His might. He's the mighty one of Israel, the mighty one of Israel. His voice shall be heard in the power of His word. He's the mighty one of Israel. He's the mighty one of Israel, mighty one of Israel. His voice shall be heard in the power of His word. He's the mighty one of Israel. The one who calms the raging storm, the one who walks upon the sea. Earth and heaven are your own, yet you're watching over me. How majestic is your name, for there is none like you. There is none like you. Together we proclaim the power of your name. There is none like you. Who can stand before your throne? The kingdom will forever reign. So we lift a song of praise to the Ancient of Days. There is none like you. There is none like you. Together we proclaim the power of your name. There is none like you. And how majestic is your name. How majestic is your name. How majestic is your name in all the earth. How majestic is your name. How majestic is your name. How majestic is your name in all the earth. For there is none like you. 'Cause there is none like you. Together we proclaim the power of your name. There is none like you. There is none like you. Mikamoka Adonai. There is none like you. Mikamoka Adonai. Adonai. Together we proclaim the power of your name. There is none like you. How majestic. How majestic is your name. How majestic is your name. How majestic is your name in all the earth. How majestic is your name. How majestic is your name. Together we proclaim the power of your name, 'cause there is none like you. Sit enthroned above the circle of the earth, spreading out the heavens like a veil. You hold the universe so firmly in your hand, reaching out in love to all the world. Hail, hail, Elyon, Most High God. Your name, El Elyon, Most High God, is your name. No one can know the secrets hidden in your heart, mysteries beyond the reach of man. No one else commands the sun to rise and then to fall. All creation heeds the great I am. El Elyon, Most High God, holy is your name. El Elyon, Most High God, your name, for you are El Elyon, Most High God, holy is your name. El Elyon, Most High God, holy is your name. Elohim El Shaddai, Yeshua Adonai, let the glory of your name be magnified. Lord Most High, you are El Elyon, Most High God, holy is your name. El Elyon, Most High God, holy is your name, for you are El Elyon, Most High God, your name. El Elyon, Most High God, holy is your name.
Lord, we seek your face in this place. We need your strength this day, O God. Our enemies surround us, and we allow them to take us down, Lord. Give us strength, Lord, by the power of your Spirit within us to recognize those voices that we need to deafen in our ears, that we might stand and be strong in the midst of this battle that we're in. And make us aware, Lord, it is a battle, and you are fighting for us more than we know. And in that we take strength and courage. And we pray for the strength of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And though we be in the fire, Lord, if you have come to take us, then we will go. But if not, we'll stand in praise and glorify your name and make known that you are our God in the midst of this mess. You always were, you are now, and you will always be. And to that we give you glory in this place. Accept our praises, Lord, from the depths of our heart as a sacrifice unto you, through the precious name of Yeshua, our Messiah, whose blood cleanses us and frees us and help us to ever grow in that knowledge to your glory. Oh, in Yeshua's name.
Sing hallelujah. 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 Sing hallelujah. Sing hallelujah. Hallelujah. land he will trust as a shepherd gathers his sheep. He will bring us back to Israel. Sing hallelujah. Sing hallelujah. Sing hallelujah. Sing hallelujah. Seated.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Let him get level on my mic. Joni, go ahead and just turn the screen off. I'm going to change what I even said I was going to change. We'll pick up on this a little bit later on. It's good to see all of you. I appreciate your prayers. I was pretty sick with COVID, and I thought I could be here last week, and I just wasn't healthy enough. I was over COVID, but still wasn't quite healthy enough. And the reality is, that trying to figure out what to do is challenging when you don't know when you're going to be here. Trying to keep up with what God is doing. Hey, Kieran. This is the first of two messages. Go ahead and turn on the CD, and we'll just jump in there. Before I got COVID at the MLR conference, that's an international conference of Messianic leaders. It was the 15th and final conference of MLR. And it was historic. And because it's historic, I decided that I wanted to explain to you that we have reached another historic juncture in the Messianic movement. And it happened at that conference. And among the things that happened is somehow COVID spread around the room, and we got an email. We got home, by the way, COVID. A lot of people came home with COVID, including me, and a lot of people in the world, a lot of the leaders. And there's a lot of things that happened that set things up. The Jerusalem Legal Council was there we ran into each other in the hallway, and they recognized my name. I know their organization. They are a legal group of lawyers who defend Israel in international court. And they said, "We hear you understand the movement. Can you explain it to us?" So I walked them down the path, and they said, we need you to meet with our whole team. We need to be aware of this. So I met a little later that evening. I met with our whole team, and I explained to them where did we come from. A lot of people don't know that. They've been working with us for years, and we're like here, but where did we come from? And so I thought that was fascinating. And I have their contact information. We're staying in contact with one another. And a lot of people really don't understand what is Messianic Judaism and how did we get where we are. And more importantly, we've hit another historic junction. Now, to understand how we came into being in the book of Acts, in the first half of the book of Acts, you're dealing with the movement, which was that point in time historically called the way. You're being replaced anyway. I ordered something that's automatic because you are not. And we were called the way, and just without going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, for those of you that have been here, when I did my series, How Do We Get From the Bible to Here, I started in the Garden of Eden. I want to jump right into the way, which really began with a pioneer, because the whole idea of this is pioneering. Okay, and I happen to have been a pioneer. All right, and so Paul, Shaul, Roman name Paul, was the first real pioneer because he took the movement that God was doing up in Antioch after Barabbas, the son of the father, the apostle, went up from Jerusalem, said, "This is significant, we need a teacher. Let's bring in Paul." And Paul knitted together that first congregation where we have the concept of one new man. Couldn't happen before then because everything was in Israel and focused in Jerusalem. There just weren't that many Gentiles. But when you go into a Greek port city like Antioch, all of a sudden you have these Greek-speaking Jews, which is where it started, Hellenist Jews, which means they were followers of the Greek culture. They came in, they had other Greek speakers coming in, and you have one new man, and that was a pioneering effort. And in the second half of the book of Acts is Paul working with the Messianic Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, trying to figure out the rules for this new movement, which was still called the Way, except it was different because the Way was a section of the Jewish people that existed, but it wasn't really the Way because you had non-Jewish people coming in to a congregational or kingdom center gathering, and it's like, what are we supposed to do? Did they live by the Torah or do they not live by the Torah? And it was quite historic because it was a big question. What do you do with a non-Jew who becomes believer? Are they obligated to keep the Torah or not? Are they obligated to be circumcised or not? Those are normal questions. And it was a huge pioneering effort to take the transition of the Way, which it would have been a part of Israel, the initial followers of Messiah, his inner core of 12, his inner core of 3. Now it went out, and it became an historical movement of one new man. Now, the Way became one new man, but they didn't give it another name because it was still based in Jerusalem. And so in the Bible, it's still called the Way, those of the Way. The Way is following Yeshua as Messiah. And so you have to have a pioneer to do that because a pioneer has to deal with really difficult questions. And they may not seem difficult, but they were very difficult. What do you do with a Gentile that's saved? Because the Bible doesn't give a lot of clear indication other than Paul's writings. What do you do with the Gentile that gets saved? A lot of you know the history of this congregation. When I planted it in 1987, I was 25 years old. If a Gentile came in and received salvation, I sent him to the church around the corner because I had no idea what to do with the Gentile that received salvation. I wasn't a scholar in the Bible, and I wasn't a scholar in the history, and I didn't know what to do with Gentiles because I just didn't know Gentiles or what they were good for. And then what had happened was the way spread throughout the Roman Empire. And most of you are very familiar with this. It started in Antioch, went from Antioch to up and around. It would be, the next thing would be Corinth and then Ephesus. You have these major cities overseen largely by Paul, who's pioneering this one new man effort. It ends up where he ends up in jail until it spills over into the congregation of Rome, which was planted at the second chapter of Acts. And they're dealing with this weird issue there of what do you do with Jews who are saved in Rome. It started in the Roman congregation because Caesar had thrown all the Jews out of Rome. And you see Paul ran into some of them out in the outer regions of the empire. During his journeys, he met Jewish believers who had been thrown out of Rome because all the Jews had to leave Rome, which means you end up a congregation that was Gentile. Except they didn't understand they couldn't be one new man because they weren't, because they were only Gentiles. So they must be Israel because God took out all the Jews and left us. Therefore, we are the new Israel, and he's done with the old Israel. And Paul wrote the letter to Romans before he ever visited Rome. No apostle had ever gone to Rome. And Paul wrote them a letter saying, look, has God cast away his people? God forbid, I'm one of them. And he's trying to straighten out this theology. Now, it's a normal problem. What's the problem? If you have a Gentile congregation and a Jew comes in, what are you supposed to do? What do you do with a Jew that gets saved? Because God chose us and left us intact, and now he's bringing in Jews, but he only works with Israel. And we didn't understand in Rome the one new man either. We just figured we must be Israel because we weren't really the way, because we were just a part of faithful Israel, all right? And all that stuff happened. Well, then Constantine, a general, he was a general. There were two generals vying for control of Rome. Caesar died. Somebody needed to seize control, and there were two generals. The stronger general was from Ephesus. Ephesus is, of course, an occult center. And he was concerned going up against a general who was practiced in the occult, because Ephesus is known as the occult capital of the world. Now, I'm going to go to battle against somebody who's steeped in the occult. I have a problem. I need help. I need spiritual help. He knew nothing about anything, so he turned to one of his favorite god, Mithras, the Persian sun god, and he called out and asked for assistance against this occult general that he could win. And he had a vision of Mithras, who most of you have seen. If you doubt it, just Google a picture of Mithras. You have a lady with the sun behind her head holding a baby, and said, and he had a vision of her. She had the sun behind her, which is where halos come from. All right, holding a baby. The baby has to be Jesus, which is the Greek name for Yeshua. Okay, so she was Mary, the Holy Mother of God, and her son was Jesus, who was the anointed one, Mashiach Christos, Jesus Christos. right? And therefore, Christianity was right, which is what they called people who were out in the way, were called in Greek Christianoi, Greek, Christianoi, for little messiahs, all right? This is the way it is, and we're going to take, and he started looking at the congregations and the kingdom centers that existed throughout the empire, and they were spirit-led, new man congregations where the gifts and the flowing of the Spirit just went around like 2 Corinthians. One person had a song, one person had a word, one person spoke in tongues, another person interpreted the tongues. If you don't have somebody interpreting, quit speaking in tongues. Do all these things, trying to put some kind of, a Roman going into that kind of a mess where everything is being disrupted and stuff, they don't like messes. They need to order it. Let's order Christianity. Because after all, it's about the Holy Mother of God and her little baby, Jesus Christus. So let's organize this. And he took the Persian religion of Mithras and turned it into Christianity with the high holy day of Ishtar, which is the high point of the spring that everybody knew about. Okay, everybody knew about that particular holiday. They weren't trying to be pagan. They had a confused emperor that was trying to be a Christian, is what that was. And then they said, we need something else. Well, the shortest night of the year is the winter solstice. And so the Messiah was born when you have the shortest night of the year where more light is going to come in. And that's where we'll celebrate his birth, the winter solstice, which became Christmas. You have these two main holidays, and they put it on us. By that point in time, when you're dealing with the things of the book of Acts or the apostolic letters and epistles, the movement has spread all through the Roman Empire, but all of a sudden the Roman Empire, Christianity became the religion of the empire, which was not terribly related to the way. It wasn't terribly related to the way. It was a Persian religion that was made to fit the Bible with a focus on Holy Mary, the Mother of God, and her son, Jesus the Christus, okay? And they organized it, and most of you are familiar with all that. When they did that, a lot of the way fled north. They went into Ireland. Ireland was just beyond the realm of the Roman Empire. They kind of exercised a loose authority up there. The Apostle Patrick, the Messianic pastor up there, led that particular movement. And rather than Rome, they couldn't really apply a religion on them. The Christian movement following Constantine took them to court in Rome, saying that the government had established this is what Christianity is, and they say they are Christians because it's Christiana. They were followers of Messiah. It wasn't a horrible thing right back then. You just have to understand, it's a foreign word. We've anglicized it. And they keep, and the charge was they keep the Passover and they keep the Sabbath. They do not celebrate Christmas and Easter. Therefore, they're not true Christians. And in the Roman court, they said, that's right. You can't say you're a Christian. If you're going to be a Christian, you must follow Christianity. And here's what Christianity is in the law. It was a legal thing. Okay, it was a legal thing. It's in the law. And it's like, well, there weren't many of us left at that point in time. So we fled up north into Scotland, went off the coast and went over to Iona, which is a little island off there. And we kind of planted there. From there, we got concerned that we were still too close to Rome. And so we swung up into what is today the French Alps. But all of a sudden, the way became a history of individuals or small groups in Scotland or in Iona, which is really a part of Scotland today. At that point in history, it was an island. And then up into the French Alps, because the Romans would never march into the French Alps to make us keep Christmas and Easter. We go up there and do Passover and circumcision and keep Shabbat. But we became not a movement. And not much happens after that. It's a spattering of Jewish believers who are not a part of the political system of Christianity. They are still biblically Christians because they follow the Messiah, which is what Christians are supposed to be doing. However, we did not adapt any Persian religion aspects. We simply did what the Bible did, and we kept Passover, we kept Shabbat. Well, the church went on historically, the political Christian church went on and spread throughout almost all of the world, and then they started dividing over petty differences, and they are very petty differences, and you could read all the church history, and it's messy because they're fighting with one another. And a lot of you know, because I've taught this all historically and stuff, it's like the local Mennonite congregation that split over whether you have one suspender up to pray or two suspenders up to pray. You know, you can't pray with one suspender up. You must have two. And there was a Mennonite church in this area that split into two based on whether you could pray with one suspender up or two suspender ups. And I was a part of that particular thing because they brought me in as a peacemaker. And it's like, what do I think? Do you need two suspenders or one suspender? It's like, I don't think you need any suspenders, so I wasn't helpful. And so as a movement, the way ceased to exist. Christianity was there, but it was a political religion. I'm not talking about Christianity of the Bible. I'm talking about Christianity of the political system of Rome, which is what was passed down to all Christianity today as a rule, although a lot of them get in trouble because they read the Bible. If you read the Bible, it upsets all of our things, which is why I threw all the liturgy today. You know what? I don't need the liturgy to worship God. I'm not opposed to liturgy. God's not opposed to liturgy. I'm not opposed to a Christmas tree. God is not opposed to a Christmas tree. If you have opposition to Christmas trees because you were raised Christian with a Christmas tree, and now that you're away from that, you say, ooh, pagan, pagan, pagan. I say, you know what? A lot of what we do is our baggage, and baggage is baggage, which is my next message. I'm giving two messages today. But see, we lost any pioneers. You had first Paul and then Patrick. And if you're not historically educated, Patrick of Ireland was not set out by the Catholic Church. He was not a missionary of the Catholic Church, which means universal, by the way. He was not a part of Christianity. He was a Jewish believer who was an apostle who planted a kingdom center in and changed all of Ireland to God. He was a pioneer because he was in a place, God sent him to a place that was absolutely controlled by a cult. A cult, all right? And you've seen them on TV. They paint themselves blue, and they're barbaric people. He went and he just, radically got a lot of people saved. Well, they destroyed him in court. They destroyed him in court. And when you go over to Iona, there's no indication that Patrick went there, which means they lost any apostolic oversight. They knew enough to stay away from historical Christianity, not biblical Christianity, historical Christianity. It's two separate things. And they fled into the Swiss Alps. And nothing much happened. And so you come to a point where The Jews are dispersed from Rome, dispersed from Jerusalem. The temple was destroyed. The Jewish people scattered all over the world, and the way has largely ceased to exist. And it's a history of individual people who float around. Christianity is now an historical entity as a political system, but they're not really impacting the world for good, except for those odd people among them who pay enough attention to the Bible that they could go out and teach people about the God of Israel and the Messiah of Israel, and God uses them even though they may have a lot of baggage. Okay? So they've spread the concept of the Creator God of Israel with the Messiah all over the world, although they did it with a weird set of uniforms and baggage, but God used them nonetheless and continues to use them nonetheless. So what happened was, in the fullness of time, which means in the Bible, the fullness of time is the next thing was supposed to happen is God was going to start a redemption of Israel. He had promised to redeem Israel, and he had promised to regather Israel. So in the late 1800s of the Common Era, you have three key people who God said, I have a calling on your life, and we're going to start redeeming Israel. And he started at the same time frame with Theodor Herzl, who planted the Zionist movement. We need to reestablish our homeland in the promised land. That all was birthed from Herzl, Theodore in English, Theodore Herzl. And you had people like Rachmael Friedland. Rachmael Friedland was a Talmudic scholar who came into the faith as one of the entrepreneurs that pioneered the Hebrew Christian movement. Okay? Then you had Ben Yehuda, who took a dead language of Hebrew and made it a living language. All this is happening at once because it makes sense. Why would God restore Jerusalem and not restore the people? So he's bringing a restoration of the people. And I wasn't there, but I understand their problem. Here's the problem. We're believers, and we are Jewish, because we tended to be Orthodox. Like I said, Rachmael, who was another good friend of mine, was a Talmudic scholar. He memorized the Talmud. And so what does he do? Because he's a believer now. And so what he does is, on Shabbat, he's a Jew, but we need to worship as believers. Believers, historically now, for 18 centuries, have been meeting on Yom Rishon. Constantine, to solidify the hold of Mithros, renamed Yom Rishon, the first day of the week, Sunday, because we worship the sun. All right? So we will meet on Yom Rishon, the first day of the week. We will meet on Friday evening because we are Jewish. We will meet on Saturday morning because we are Christians. Not historical Christians, biblically Christians, okay? Rachmael was one of the first ones that grasped that. There was quite a few others. I'm kind of moved to it. But you need pioneers. Herzl is a pioneer. Ben Yehuda is a pioneer. Friedland these are all pioneers that came in and they did something. And the Hebrew Christian movement was huge. It was huge. It ended up being based in Germany, the largest congregation until Ukraine in the past 10 years. It was the largest Jewish believing congregation of the world. It was the Hebrew Christian Church of Berlin. They have a 500-man men's choir that toured all over Europe. They were famous. They were a huge movement. 3 out of every 4 Jews in Germany were Hebrew Christians. They were Hebrew Christians because we were Jewish, but we were Christian. And how do you put those two together? And it's like, I don't know, but we meet on Friday because we're Jewish. We meet on Sunday because we're believers. And all that happened. Well, then the Holocaust came and wiped out not only a third of the Jewish people, it killed more than 2/3 of the Hebrew Christian movement. It just killed everybody. At the men's choir, there was one survivor, which we flew over and interviewed, so we wouldn't lose that history. Well, then everything was kind of languishing. The Jewish community had been decimated. There wasn't a Jewish person in the world that didn't lose somebody in the Holocaust. And we all knew no matter where we were in the world, it was just a matter of time before they came after us here. It was a deep, dark side time for the Jewish people, because the promised land prior to the Holocaust was Poland, where we had complete freedom of religion, and we flocked to Poland. We call it the New Israel. Complete freedom of religion, which is why there were so many Jews in Poland, which is why the Holocaust was big in Poland. But they were destroying the Hebrew Christian movement. Well, then we had the Great War, the war to end all wars. We had the Second World War, which crushed all that. And when the smoke had cleared of the war, you had the Hebrew Christian movement, which is now based in England, because they weren't that strong prior to the Holocaust. Germany was a stronghold, but now everybody in Germany was dead. But you still had the Hebrew Christian in England, and because of the transition out of Europe, they brought it to the United States. And there started to be Hebrew Christian congregations in the United States. Marty Chernoff, Hans van der Steur. No, not van der Steur, it's the wrong name again. I'm thinking about Peter. Hans, I forget Hans' last name. That's terrible. I don't have any notes. And if Dr. Louis Goldberg, you had I see people's face. I can try to remember their names now. Most of them are dead because they were Hebrew Christians. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, dispensationalist Christian, seminary trained. Moish Rosen, Jews for Jesus. He, again, seminary trained Hebrew Christian. And then, but it was just an ineffectual type kind of things, but something was stirring. Something was stirring. Well, then God did something phenomenal in the liberation of Jerusalem. And overnight, the whole Jewish world stopped from living in the shadow of the Holocaust to celebrating the God of Israel, which led to what they called in this country the Jesus movement. The Jesus movement swept both coasts, and nobody knows what happened to those young people that became a part of the Jesus movement. The reality is that's where all of the baby boomer rabbis came from. It was almost all Jewish. That's why it wasn't real strong in the middle of the country. It was strong in the big Jewish sections. And Jewish people were flocking into the kingdom. And before we couldn't wear any Jewish symbolism, when Israel took the badge of shame and made it into the Star of David, we all started wearing Stars of David's. Because we said, don't think Jew, think Israeli. You know, we're not Jews destroyed by the Germans. We are Israelis that can beat anybody. And it was a total change, but we got swept into the kingdom of God. We got swept into the kingdom of God. There weren't any Hebrew Christian congregations. There were churches led by Hebrew Christians scattered around, but nothing Messianic, because Messianic did not exist anymore. Well, we connected with each other long distance. The first Jewish believer I ever met other than myself, and I don't include my wife, who came 3 months after I came, was Simcha Davidov. Simcha was a Sabra from Kibbutz Kfar Manachim. He lived way down there in West Virginia in the hills, and we were doing ministry all over the place. We were on fire. It was a revival. And we were just going out witnessing on the streets. We had coffee houses. We had Jesus festivals. I did all this stuff. I had 2 coffee houses. I had Jesus festival. We did a drug thing with David Wilkerson, helping our peers get out of drugs and stuff like that. We did all that stuff, and we were doing something. Then we'd get together, and the problem is we were Jewish believers. What were we supposed to do? Because it's not like we can go to a church. And that was the grace of God. I want you to know that. That was the grace of God. Because I got saved in a church. I got saved at church, a charismatic Bible church. So God just grabbed me, pulled me in there, and I'm sure the guy said, "Do you want to receive salvation?" I said, "Of course I do." He said, "Kneel down, raise your hand, say this prayer." I probably said a sinner's prayer. I'm sitting in a church like, what are these people doing? What are they doing? But God was just pushing me. And I said, okay, I probably said a sinner's prayer. And I said, well, now you're a believer. And you're Jewish, so you know the Old Testament. I said, okay. And he says, you can start teaching Sunday. It's like, okay. And it's like, okay. And so that Sunday morning, I was in junior church teaching the kids because I knew the Old Testament. But the pastor, Richard Mell, was a godly man. He knew the Bible. But God just birthed in me something. I read the Bible. A lot of you know my story. I was sitting somewhere in the middle of the night. I found an American Standard Bible. And I sat there, and it was supernatural. I wasn't used to supernatural. God was speaking to me. I wasn't used to God speaking to me. But I sat there and read the Bible 5 times in one night, from Genesis to the Revelation. Because I had to spend the night there anyway, because I was doing something that I did at that point in time, which was a supervisory position. Didn't have to work, but I had to sit there waiting for appointments to come in during the night because it's the kind of job I had. And I just read it, and it's like, oh, okay, I see it. It's one Bible. I did not know the Old Testament. I didn't know anything. But when I read, I started and I went to Revelation. It's a Jewish book. It makes sense. It's about redemption, and it's like, oh, this makes complete sense. And then 3 months into this, we're trying to connect. We're connecting with other Jewish believers. I said, Simcha was the first. Jeremiah Greenberg. Some of you know Jeremiah. He's up in Tampa now, part of Steve's congregation. I went to a coffee house at West Virginia University to address the student body. And he came and said, well, I'm a Jewish believer. What am I supposed to do? You know? And I said, be a Jewish believer. He wrote the purple Siddur. If you ever see that, that's Jeremiah's. And he says, I can be Jewish and believe. I said, of course, you are Jewish and you believe. What are you supposed to do? I said, I don't know. And I went to my pastor. He'd teach a message, and I go, excuse me. After the service, you applied that message to your church. It's not about your church. It's about Israel. And he says, you have a calling on your life, and God will reveal it to you. I'm teaching types and foreshadows. You are the root, and God will reveal that to you. And it's like, what are we supposed to do? Well, then things got, the Jesus movement, he was flexible guy. All kind of young people came into his church because he could get along with us. You know, a lot of my generations were drug addicts, long hair, a little bit disheveled, people that went to places like Woodstock, you know, yeah. And then it was, the church was growing. He's not going to make you an outer. It's like, okay. And then I heard the anti-Semitism, which I grew up with. Some used to, now I'm going to have a Jew in charge. Going to have a Jew in charge. And I thought, you know what? I went to Richard, which I called him Richard. I said, Richard, I love you. You have done nothing but love me, accept me, and help me. I don't want you to experience what I have experienced. I'm leaving. And he said, no, you don't have to. I said, yes, I do. I don't. You don't deserve to hear the garbage that I've grown up with. And so then, and it was about an hour and a half from my house. It's where I got saved. So there's a church right down the street. Went down to church. When I'm knocking, hey, I'm here. I got this nose. My name is Judah. You're Jewish. I said, yeah, we don't allow Jews in our church. I said, oh, that's okay. I never did figure out the rules. And so I drove down the other way. And I went to the next church. And I said, hi. And it's like, you're Jewish. I said, yeah, we don't allow Jews in our church. I said, okay. I wasn't offended. So I decided to go down to the city. We lived a little bit out on the hills. Went down cities. There's a lot more churches to choose from. People are probably a lot more tolerant. I went down and walked up to this church, went in the front door. It's like, hi. He said, oh, you're Jewish. Yeah, I said, we don't allow Jews in our church. I said, I'll never figure out the rules. And so we were starting to gather small groups of Jewish believers and non-Jewish believers because we were all young and we were all fiery. And all of a sudden, it's like, we can't go to church. We don't fit in the church. And it was inevitable that at some point, I learned from my rabbi, I shouldn't mention his name. I don't know if he still remembers. My rabbi. And he stood in the back of the room and talked to people, answered questions. He loved questions. Well, that's where I learned that from. I love questions. I love to ask questions. I love to ask questions. And we'd sit and I'd debate whether Yeshua was the Messiah or not. I was on fire. My Maranatha belt buckle, which is Aramaic for he's our Lord is coming, Maranatha. And it's like, and then one evening, because it's a Friday evening service, the rabbi came over and said, Judah, it would be better if you never came back in. I don't want to see you anymore. I said, yes, ma'am. So I walked out. Rebbitsons are powerful. And I left. And it's like, now what are we supposed to do? And I'm talking to my other Jewish friends. We don't fit anywhere. Now, I was the grace of God. Had the church accepted us, we had gone into the church and assimilated. And we would become historic Christians, not biblical Christians. And it was very easy for us. We would have done that. And God in his grace and mercy says, no, I'm doing a redemption. I won't allow you to go into the church. You have to. And so we pioneered, and we got together, and we started meeting. And there were two groups that were meeting, Jews for Jesus, which is in reality Hineni Ministries, but everybody knows them as Jews for Jesus. They are not Jews for Jesus. They are Hineni Ministries. They were running little conferences over New York City. I drove over across West Virginia, picked up Simcha, and we went over to New York and went to a Jews for Jesus in-gathering, they called them. And we sat in the room. There was like 24 of us. And all of a sudden, we're sitting in a room, and for the first time, we had this feeling, if they come in, they're not coming after me. They're coming after us. I'm no longer a minority in this group. I'm one of us, and this was identity. And as the conference went on, there were Hebrew Christians there. Rachmael was there, Rachmael Friedland. There were a couple Hebrew Christians there who were helping us deal with some of these issues because they were scholarly. And somebody said, you like this, you ought to go to Messiah Conference. It's like, Messiah Conference? What's a Messiah Conference? It's over in Pennsylvania. And so we checked out to it. It was a conference. It was at Messiah College. No relationship. I forget what denomination it is. And it was a gathering. And now you go and there's 100 people there. 100 Jewish believers. It's like, whoa, and we're starting to talk. What are we going to do? And we became the pioneers of the Messianic movement. Because the Hebrew Christians were there. Rachmael would be there. Marty would be there. Hans would be there. I'm missing somebody. I don't know, but John Fisher, I forget who it was. Somebody else, and we'd sit around, and he said, well, we meet Friday because we're Jewish and Sunday because, I said, well, we're not Christians, and we don't want to be Christians. I'm one of those radicals. I don't know Christianity. I don't understand it. They don't want us. I don't want them. And there were those of us. I wasn't alone in this. Said, no, we're not Christians. No, you're Hebrew Christians. No, we don't want to be Hebrew Christians. We don't want to be Hebrew Christians. But in 67, it's like, bang, you know what? We're Jews. And so we created our own organization under the auspices of the Hebrew Christian Alliance of America, which was a subsidiary of the British Hebrew Christian Alliance. We started the YMJA, which some of you have heard of, the Young Messianic Jewish Alliance, spearheaded by Manny Brotman. Manny Brotman was one of the pioneers of this movement. We said, we are not Hebrew Christians. We are Messianic Jews. And we wrote the Constitution and bylaws to present to the Hebrew Christian Alliance of America that we were going to start a new organization called the Young Messianic Jewish Alliance. And it says, if you read their constitutional bylaws, we can do anything we want regardless of what the Hebrew Christian Alliance thinks. Well, there was a lot of pushback from the Hebrew Christian movement who controlled everything. But what happened is we had turned 30 years old, which was old. And in our Constitution, we said, when you turn 30, you got to leave because we don't trust old people. And all of a sudden, we show up and we said, I make a motion, we create the Hebrew Christian Alliance. I second the motion. No, you can't do that. Call for the question. I became a parliamentarian. I helped railroad this through. Call for the questions. All of a sudden, there's so many 30 years olds in the room. We changed the Hebrew Christian Alliance to the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America. Moishe Rosen, who has since come back, he's dead now, but he did come back to Messiah Conference and say, look, we have a difference of opinion, and we're not. And he did it in Nikita Cruz. He took off his shoe, and he's pounding on the table on the stage. This is not from God. This is not from God. This is not from God. It will go nowhere. And Marty said, if it's not of God, it won't go anywhere. It is of God, you might be fighting against God. A lot of biblical things happening there. And so now we established the Messianic Jewish movement. We are pioneering the Messianic Jewish movement. What do? We're not Christians. We never want to be Christians. Christians are, and we had to push back against the church. So what happened is people like Dr. Michael Brown, who had been delivered from drugs, wrote a very necessary book, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, about the atrocities of the Christian church, who was always trying to kill us. And it was us and them, and we were us and they were them. And one of his earliest books was absolutely important. Why? Because we had to push back against the church, who had been anti-Semitic historically, and we wanted nothing to do with the church. And they didn't want anything to do with us, so it wasn't that hard for them to swallow. And the reality is, we're there for the Jewish community, even though they reject us because they rejected the Messiah, they rejected the early way, and we're still there for them. And so we'll try to reach the Jewish community. Christianity, that's God's problem. And then we started planting congregations. The original congregations were not led by rabbis. We didn't want rabbis. We weren't rabbinic Jews. We were Messianic Jews. So the early leaders of the movement, everyone went by their first name. It was Marty, it was Arnold, it was Rachmael. And we start to gather, and all of a sudden there's more and more congregations coming up. And they were congregations because we didn't want to be synagogues. And so what do we do? How do we define ourselves? We're anti-Christian. We didn't say that, but we were. It was a pushback because they were pushing us. We push back on them, and we give that left hand to the rabbinic community. They're lost. We're the remnant. We're the remnant. We became the remnant. And then we started planting our congregations. And originally they were all congregations. The International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogue was originally going to be the International Alliance of Messianic Congregations. By the time we got it worked out, I wrote the constitution and bylaws for that particular entity too. There were always the congregations because they came out of the Hebrew Christian movement. They were congregations. Now there were young people coming in. We're calling our place of worship a synagogue because we're a synagogue, we're the faithful. So we made it, if you notice, the UMJC, which split off first, became the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations. By the time we formed, which was a couple years later, with the International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues, because everyone's like, what do you do? What do you do? And so we're just putting our feet down. We're putting a line. This is the line. We will not cross it. We are Messianic Jews. We are not Christians. We are not rabbinic. We are Jews. But are you supposed to meet on Shabbat? Are you supposed to have a Torah scroll? Are you supposed to be called rabbi? All that stuff was really confused because what do you do with a Jewish person that believes, who doesn't want to be a Christian, who isn't really a rabbinic Jew? Well, it's okay, we're Messianic Jews. It's nice to, and we pioneered. And then God called us to go and plant a congregation somewhere where there's Jewish people. Go in. You have this awkward relationship with the church, which is as it's historical church at its roots, anti-biblical, but they all have the same problem. They have the Bible. And so they read their Bible and they don't know what to do with us either. Nobody really knows what to do with us. We don't fit anywhere. And so what happens is some of the church says, we're happy to have you. Other churches, it's like, we're the only way, and you got to go with that. And this odd thing, the Jewish community was pushing back against us, trying to destroy us, took turns trying to destroy us, actually, for those of you here during the Dirty Church campaign. And we established we were there. And we are adamant. We are not Christians. Their hands are stained with blood. We are not rabbinics. We're the faithful remnant. And that is where pioneers come from. I'm one of the pioneers that was engaged in that particular transition between Messianic Judaism and Hebrew Christianity. Now, to understand why that has to change, I want to give you something that I was made aware of at MLR, which helps people understand. How does a pioneer cease to be a pioneer? Because here's the reality. I'm not trying to establish Messianic Judaism. Messianic Judaism is established. We're not an unknown entity. And it's kind of like Xerox. So I want to give you a history of Xerox. Xerox was a pioneer in the copying industry. They were absolutely pioneers in the concept. And they made Xerox machines. They were so popular that if you wanted a facsimile copy, it was called, "Can you give me a Xerox?" Name recognition. They were huge. They were huge. And they had a lot of money, and they got a research and development group together to develop more stuff. And the stuff, they were just thinking outside the box. They created the first tabletop computer. It weighed 600 pounds. But they created it. Another one of the big things you have heard of, they actually created the computer mouse. Because before the mouse, if you wanted to communicate with your computer, you had to enter commands through the keyboard. All right? 1964, Douglas Engelbart, who was one of their engineers, took a circuit model and a couple wheels and made it interact with the computer with just a click. It was huge. They created the mouse. They really didn't want to get computers because it was expensive. And they were such a successful copy company that they were huge and big and renowned. Then they created the speedometer. All right? Humans can perceive acceleration, deceleration, but we can't perceive actual speed. We don't know how fast we're really going. But before the automobile, we didn't have to worry about how fast we were going. But as the automobiles got faster, it became necessary to understand how fast we were going. They created the speedometer. But it didn't do anything for the copy industry, so they didn't do anything with it. Okay, because they were incredibly successful. They were pioneers. They created text-to-speech synthesis. In other words, this releases a potential for the computer. This releases the potential for the user instead of for the computer. And what this is, it allows people with reading disabilities to interface and I'm trying to think of the word. Just naturally by speaking into the computer. And it's like you think of where that is today. Now you don't have to type, you don't even need your mouse, you just tell it. You just tell it. But they didn't do anything with that because they were really successful. Copier company. The next one of the other, this is not exhaustive, but this is a long list because you need to see it. They were pioneers. Natural language user interfaces. Okay? Siri, Cortana. You know, you're driving down the road and you say, "Call home," and your car calls home. You know, you have to understand. That seems simple to you, but what if you have a Georgian accent? Is your car going to understand your Southern drawl, your Boston accent? Oh yeah, this is all. They created all this. It was brilliant, but they didn't do anything with it. Why? They were such a successful, pioneering copy country. The next big thing they did was the rotary dial. Before you had the rotary dial, you had to click on the thing to send sparks to an operator who knew you were trying to do something. You say, connect me to somebody. Well, they fixed it so you can go like this, and you don't have to click and find an operator. You can call somebody direct, a rotary dial. But they didn't do anything for their copy company, so they didn't do anything with it. Because they were so successful. They created the iPod click wheel. It took a little bit after the rotary dial, because the iPod gives you all the music you want in your pocket. And the click wheel defines sharply defined functionality of the tactile simplicity in a way it reinvigorated an interest in music. Marty Getz was at this conference as we were transitioning between the old movement and the new thing that God is doing with us. He said, we used to know how successful we were by how many CDs we sold. And he looked, because his daughter Misha was standing next to Josh, and he said, what's a CD? You know, well, he used to know. You understand? Not anymore. But they didn't do any of that. Why? They were successful, a incredibly successful copier company. The QWERTY keyboard. The QWERTY keyboard. QWERTY. And that's why when you have a keyboard, the letters aren't in order. They are scattered around, because if you hit two keys next to one another, you jammed it up. Because they had to have time to go from this letter to this letter. And so he stirred it up in a way that you no longer have A, B, C. You know, the A is here. You know, you can do that. Now you can go as fast as you can go, as fast as your fingers will take you. And by the way, it's set up in such a way that if you use the top line, you can spell typewriter. If you go down the top line, it spells typewriter. And young people say, what's a typewriter? But they didn't do anything with it. Why? Because it really didn't affect the copy industry. And they were an incredibly successful copy company. Predictive text. This came into our phones because in the phones it was harder to type because it was a smaller keyboard. And so they developed a T9, the letter T, the number 9. We spend less time trying to fumble because the phone guesses what word you're trying to say. It spells it out for you. That's a big deal. Doesn't do much for your copier, so they didn't do anything with it. All right? They were really successful. Electronic tolling collection, the ETC. Prior to the electronic tolling collection, if you were on a road with a toll booth, everybody had to stop, get some money, get some change, and pull through. Now, you just breeze through, and it reads, and it takes it out of your account. And, you know, that transponders, all that stuff, they did that. But what's it do for your copier? Nothing. They ain't doing with it. The search engine. Sir Dim Barton Lee. These guys are all historic. They were part of that. use the index of the World Wide Web, www, by hand. And so what they did was they developed a key word that you could put in the word, and it'll link you to all kinds of things that tie to that. All right? That's the search engine. But again, doesn't do anything for your copier. So they didn't do anything with it. We're not going to, I'll skip that one. I'll skip that one. Remote control. Remote control was the idea is you can actually control something without being there, which is why today they're practicing driverless cars. It started with Xerox. But nothing was done because they weren't, the handles that have grips on them, it's called a lamb handle. You know how you have, if your fingers fit the handle on your skillet, on your pans, on your knives and stuff. It's a lamb because Thomas Lamb created that. The Solari board in the 1950s, if you were traveling on a train, they had to get up and change the letters to say what's on time, what's not going to be on time. Solari system allowed them to go far beyond that, where they could just push a button and all of a sudden the sign changes. And to make people comfortable, it goes click, 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 which wasn't necessary, but they knew they didn't want people to know it wasn't changing. And they designed that, but they didn't do it because they were so successful. An internet chat relay, the web browser, a popsicle stick, which allowed you to eat ice cream with your fingers without being so messy. You know, the minute hand. Clocks only had an hour hand because that was close enough. However, a minute hand allows us to break that down. And they created that. They were so successful. E-readers. Bookstores are gone. Our 2 generations from me, why would you have a book? You go into my living room, I have this huge library of books, and people walk in, I got that on my phone. The hashtag. They invade caller ID. Now you know who's calling you, so you don't have to answer. Satellite navigation system, GPS. They developed that. Didn't really do anything for a computer or for a copier, so they didn't do anything with it. Okay, now I think I'm going to see if there's anything else that interests you. Virtual reality. They did all that stuff. It was in the research and development. They did absolutely nothing with it. A young guy who was trying to do something computer named Steve Jobs visited their R&D factory. He'd been working on computer for almost 3 years, and he walked in there and looked at that and say, wow, we don't know what we're doing. And so what people don't know about Steve Jobs is that he went back to his team and said, we got to throw out everything we did and tie into Xerox R&D. He went over there, hired their top engineers, and brought them to his company and created the Apple computer, right? Why doesn't anyone know Xerox today? They went bankrupt because they couldn't compete with Koji, who had a better copier. They were pioneers. And they established a very successful commodity with worldwide recognition. And they died because the world no longer needed a pioneering system. This congregation was planted in 1987. When I was 25 years old, it was a stake in the ground where we are going to be Messianic Jewish Synagogue. Not just a Messianic synagogue, Beth Messiah, a Messianic synagogue. And I drove that into people. We've been here a long time. We are a Messianic synagogue. We are not a church. We are not a synagogue. We are a Messianic synagogue. And we strengthen that. You push back on the church and you go against the Jewish community. And here we are. And the reality is, since that time, a lot of you have come here after 1987. And if we don't stop being a pioneering group, we're going to become obsolete and go bankrupt. Because just because you're successful doesn't mean you can keep going, which is why we had the last MLR. It was the 15th. It had served its purpose. There's no point in doing it anymore. Because we are no longer a part of a Messianic movement. We have become a Messianic community. We are established. We are here. We don't have to push back against the church. We have lost tremendous amount by not being honest about the biblical concept. If we have our baggage, they have their baggage, and we are in the kingdom together. We cannot afford to be anti-Christian, no matter how they feel about us. And I've taught that, but now I see it so clearly. We got the partnership with the church. If we don't partnership with the church, we're missing half of or 2/3 of what God's doing in the world today. Yes, they're not doing it all right. That's okay. Judaism isn't doing all the right way. And Messianic Judaism is not doing it all the right way. We also have to embrace the Jewish community. They have a place that they could come and be exposed to the truth. I don't have to prove to them I'm Jewish. You don't have to prove to anybody you're Jewish. We are a Messianic community who are following the precepts of one new man. We come together where we are comfortable with the things of God, and God wants to do what he wants to do, even if it upsets our apple cart. We didn't have any of the liturgy today. Some people would be uncomfortable with that. That throws off what we're supposed to do in the computer and stuff like that. But you know what? I don't need the liturgy to gather together with God's people. I need God's people to gather together with people. And I appreciate you here. That was the introduction. Now I'm going to give a message. We're going to do two things. We're going to receive your tithes and offerings and give you a chance to get up, get a drink, and go to the bathroom. Okay, and I'm going to give a quick message. So for those of you who want to be properly received for a cash donation, raise your hand as the ushers come down the aisles behind you. They'll give you an envelope to write a receipt with. Those of you online, click on the online giving. You want to designate any special gifts, particularly to Israel. Designate to Israel. 100% of you will go to Israeli believers. And online, if you designate anything or want to talk to me, email me at rabbijudah@bethmessiah.life. Don't contact me on Facebook or Twitter. Email me, rabbijudah@bethmessiah.life. So, God of Abraham, Isaac, we offer to these. These are tithes, gifts, and love offerings, and I ask you would accept them and increase them to the building of your kingdom through your ministry. Amen. I just want to announce a couple things going on. Even though they're flashing the lights, we're not actually quitting. Judo Monday evening, 6 p.m. All of my judo students will be receiving certificates Monday evening at the class. Now, I already prayed while you guys were walking. Do your thing. Now I'm going to do two things. I want you to get up, move around, greet one another, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water. I'll give a quick message. I want to talk to you about depression. Rashid is here. We can start. Get everybody back in the room. Rashid's here. We can go. Everyone come back, please. Everyone come back, please. Can we have everyone in here, please? Joni, I'm actually going to give a message now. Can we have everyone in the room? If they're not going to come in the room, close the doors so we can start anyway. I want to get into this so we can end the day. Maria, close those doors. Close the doors, please. Children. I'm going to send Cecilia after you. Children. Yalla. Can I have everyone's attention? Those of you in the room, can you stop talking, please? Can I have everybody in the room at least stop talking? I can't shut them down in the hallways, but in here. I want to mention one thing before I give the message. Dr. Michael Brown's latest book, which I'm not sure he has out in print yet, is Revival or We Die. Or Revive or We Die. I forget what it's called. I've read it, but I don't think it's out in print yet. But it's a good read. And the bottom line is, if we don't revive, we are dead already. Because we don't need our hands are stained with blood today. We need revival or we're dead. And I just mentioned that because that's the transition. Are you ready for the next CD, Kieran? Okay, I want to talk to you about depression. I want to talk to you about depression because depression is real. Depression covers a lot of different concepts and entities, but 2020 has been a very difficult year. It's been a very difficult year. You've had COVID, you've had a political unrest, you have had social unrest, you have had the world spinning out of control and instability growing, and there's been little to hold on to in the world, and the only thing stable we have in our life is the truth, which is the only stabilizing force that we have. But even those of us who stand on the rock of Messiah and the truth of God deal with the ramifications of depression. And it's something that I felt was a requirement for us to look at. And looking in the Bible, when you think about the Bible, who do you think about battled with depression? You know, who are the main key players that battled with depression? To varying degrees. The most obvious is Elijah. Hannah, because she couldn't have a baby. You have Job, who said, I just lost everything. I'll just sit here and die. You have Yeshua. Father, if possible, let this pass from me. Father, why have you forsaken me? It's that downturn in our lives, even among believers, even among Bible people. It's David when the prophet came in and said, "You're the man." And he was crushed. And I was going to give a message on that, but I chose Elijah. I chose Elijah because I identify with him and what he is doing. Because Elijah was a very successful prophet. He is known rightfully as a very successful prophet. And he was called to a very difficult ministry because he was going to the northern kingdom, which was always a godless kingdom, to one of the most ungodly kings of the ungodly kingdom, Ahab. Okay? Ahab. And so he was called to be a prophet to an evil king and his evil queen, Jezebel, at a time when all of the northern kingdom of Israel was apostate. And his calling was incredible. It's a huge calling. And in 1 Kings 17, beginning in verse 1, I'm going to stay in verse 17, I think, mostly, if you want to open your Bibles. Now Elijah the Tishbite, one of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab the king, "As Adonai, God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be no dew or rain these years except by my word." And so he goes up to the very powerful, evil king with his wife Jezebel in an apostate kingdom, and says, "As sure as the God of Israel lives, no more rain." And then the next verse 2, the word of Adonai came to him. Now that you've done that particular task, what I want you to do is verse 3. "Leave this place, turn eastward, and hide yourself by the wadi." In English, I'm not saying English. Kerith, on the other side of the Jordan. So here's what you're going to do. Go tell this powerful king, it's not going to rain anymore until I say it will. Now go hide. Okay? You just confronted the king. All right? Good idea to go hide. Going to be a drought, so I want you to hide where there's a stream. Okay? And here's what you're going to do in verse 4. "It will come about that you will drink from the wadi. I have also commanded ravens to free you." So there's not going to be any rain, so go hide yourself. But hide where there's a wadi, where there's a stream, so you have something to drink. And you're not going to be able to eat anything, so I'll use an unclean bird, a raven, which is an unclean bird, to bring you food. And being a faithful prophet, in the next verse, so he went and did according to the word of Adonai. He went and lived by the wadi Kerith, which is east of the Jordan. In other words, he went to the east bank instead of the west bank. He crossed over into what is today Jordan. And so he's hiding. He's hiding from the king, because you don't just confront a king. The king says, "Oh, okay." So he's hiding, and he has a place to drink. Verse 6, "The ravens kept bringing him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the wadi." Well, that has its own ramifications, because the raven is an unclean bird, and the ravens come and drop off bread and meat for him to eat in the morning and the evening, and during the day he could drink from the brook, right? He's living out in away from the king, hiding out. But there's a problem when you're living off a stream in a place where there's no rain. What's going to happen? The next verse 7, "Came to pass after a while the wadi dried up, because there had been no rain in the world. In the land, excuse me. Now he's standing there. He's sitting there. He's in bushes. Goes, drinks when he wants to drink. Every morning a raven shows up, drops some food and meat and bread, and he eats and meat and bread. Then the wadi dries up because he has a successful ministry. He said there would be no rain, and indeed, there's no more water. Now he has no water to drink. You can't live by bread and meat, even if the raven bring it to you. But it's a sign that you're successful. Your ministry is successful when things get harder. Because what you said would happen actually comes to pass. There's nothing easy anymore. And so now that has happened, God speaks to him again in verse 8. Then the word of Adonai came to him. God said, by the way, verse 9, arise, go to Zarephath of Sidon up in Lebanon, and stay there. I've commanded a widow to provide for you. Now he's going to go from the east bank of Jordan all the way up and around to the coast of Lebanon today, Sidon. And he's going to go to this widow who has enough to feed herself one meal, and then she's going to die. And the prophet says, no problem, you feed me, because God said to, and he'll take care of things. You know, there's nothing easy about doing what God tells you to do sometimes. And even though your ministry is successful, it doesn't look like it is. Now, you know, I went from being fed by ravens to being fed by a widow. No indication she was Jewish, by the way, because she's up in Sidon. And I'll use this woman to take care of you, even though she has nothing. But you know I'm with you because I'll increase what she has to take care of you in the time that you are there. And so this goes on for a couple years. What's happening? Well, there's no rain. The whole nation has been suffering droughts. The king and queen are angry as they ever could be against this prophet who has disappeared. So what does God do? Oh, you know, time to go back to Ahab. And so he goes back, drifts south till he's up on the top of Mount Carmel at Mukhaba, which is where he challenged, if you've been on our tours, that's where, up there is where he challenges the prophets. And so that's all the way down to chapter 18, verse 20. So Ahab sent word to all the children of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. So he challenges the whole nation, the northern kingdom only, Israel. Okay, there's a southern kingdom called Judah. They're not a part of this ministry. And he says, everybody gathered together, including all the prophets, not God's prophets, the prophets of the king and queen. And then he gets up in front of the people and before all the prophets of Baal, who is the main god of that particular kingdom at that point in history, in verse 21. He approached the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If Adonai is God, follow him. If Baal is, follow him. And the people did not answer him, not even a word. So he gets up in front of all the people and said, look, if the God of Israel is God, you need to worship him. And if Baal is God, then you need to worship him. And the people said, you know, what do you do with that? Well, you kind of, you see, I want to read a little bit more because I want you to see what was going on inside of him. Very successful, but a successful ministry doesn't mean everything's going smooth. All right? As a matter of fact, a successful ministry can be full of stressful things in this world. He's got a lot of stress, even though God is speaking to him. He's very successful in his ministry, but he's full of stress. Verse 22, is that where I'm going? I'm not looking at my notes. Whatever's next. 22. Elijah said to the people, I'm the only prophet of Adonai left, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Well, he says something that you should see. I'm the only prophet that's left. Here I am by myself. Because that's the biggest thing with depression, is the feeling that you're alone. It's the alone. You see, it's not always, I'll get into this a little bit more. I'm going to go quickly through this. There's a lot of reasons for depression, including chemical. You could have a chemical imbalance. I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't mean to, but most of the chemical balance is inside of you, and that's very real. And sometimes you can take a medication that will help the chemical imbalance within you. And if you have a chemical imbalance, it's okay to take something to try to balance the chemicals within you. But the reality is most of the imbalances don't come from what is out of tune within us. It's what is out of tune without us. It's not what's here, it's what's out there. And here's the reality. I'm all alone and nobody cares. I'm the only one left. Paul has 450 prophets. I'm alone. I'm here. I'm in front of you. The king's on your side. The queen's on your side. The people are on your side. They're not on your side. They're not on anybody's side. They're paying attention. He says, I'm all alone. You need to see that. That's still in him. It's like, I'm the prophet. Okay? He didn't say I'm the prophet. He said, I'm the only prophet. I'm all by myself. I have a really successful ministry, but really it's only me. I'm alone. I'm alone. And you can see there's stress in his life, even in the height of his ministry, confronting the people according to the word of the Lord. If God of Israel is God, worship him. If Baal's God, worship him. And they sit there and say, and? And he said, look, I'm the only one here. I'm all by myself. I'm all alone. And that's the first sign of depression. It's not that you're despondent over life. It's that you're so alone and nobody else even knows how alone you are. He announced, I am alone. And that is the first sign of depression, when you feel like, I'm alone. I'm alone. And you feel like you're alone because you're one of those peculiar people that nobody understands. Like Elijah. I'm here doing something very successful. I'm doing exactly what God said to do, but I feel so alone. I feel such stress over being by myself. Verse 23, now let them give us 2 young bulls let them choose one. Give us 2 young bulls. Let them choose one for themselves and cut into pieces, lay it on the altar of wood, and put no fire underneath. So the people, they prepared the other bull, laid on the wood, put no fire underneath. And then you continue with that in verse 24. Call on the name of your God, Baal, and I will call on the name of Adonai, and the God who answers by fire. He is God. And the people says, yeah, that would work. Okay, they can agree to that. The God who answers with fire, he will be God. Now he's doing what God told him. He has faith that God is going to do what he said to do, and he's standing there doing what God told him to do, but he feels alone, and he feels stressed. Because here's the reality. I know God's going to do this, but boy, if he doesn't, I'm already in trouble. Not that I waver in my faith. It's just that the stress of being in God's ministry can sometimes touch our lives in a very real world. And we think we can't get through this because we're so much by ourselves. Now, you all know the story. They do this, they call out, they start cutting themselves. That's to get Baal's attention. He's teasing them. Maybe he's asleep, maybe he's going to the bathroom. Come on, get louder. And they go wild, trying to get Baal to answer, and nothing happens. Down to verse 36. Now it's time for the offering of the evening sacrifice. So it's time for the evening sacrifice, about 5 p.m. He came near and said, Adonai, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Let everybody know, you're God, I'm your servant. I'm alone. Let them know you're God, I'm yours. Let them know. Let them know I've done all these things. Verse 37, answer me, Adonai, answer me, so that these people may know that you, Adonai, are God, that you have turned their heart back again. That's the real message. I just threw in, let them know that I'm with you, because it's just stressful. And then the verse 38, the fire of Adonai fell, consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and licked the water from the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, Adonai, he is God. Adonai, he is God. You recognize this from the High Holy Day liturgy. Adonai, hu-ha, Elohim. Adonai, hu-ha, Elohim. The Lord is God. The Lord is God. Adonai, hu-ha, Elohim. So God answered by fire. God proved that he was real, and Elijah was his prophet. And then you get to chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel what Elijah had done and how he had slain all the prophets with a sword, because he killed them all. And so in verse 2, Jezebel sent a messenger Elijah saying, so let the gods do to me and worse by this time tomorrow if I don't make your life like one of them. Now here's a guy who's just a prophet of God. He's like one of the most incredible prophets of God, so loyal. God always shows up. And he says, but I'm so alone. This is so much stress. You showed up. Yes. The people all said, Adonai, hu Elohim. And the queen says, yeah, well, I'm going to kill you too. So what's the reaction of a man of God in the next verse? He's frightened. He got up and ran for his life. Like, what? You know, if God did that for me, I wouldn't get up and run for my life. But the reality, even when God is doing something miraculous, there's so much stress involved. I just got to run for my life. When he came to Beersheba, which belonged to Beersheba, way down south. Beersheba, way down south. He left Israel, went way down south in Judah, and he left his servant there. He was all alone. Of course, the servant was there, but he doesn't count, because the servant doesn't have the calling. He's alone. But he's running for his life, and he can't run for his life with somebody else because he's alone, so he leaves the servant there so he can go on alone, because he feels alone. He feels alone. That's depression. I feel alone. I feel alone. I can't do this. I'm stressed. I'm stressed. I'm stressed. God is here. God is showing up. God is proving himself to be God. But I want to be, I'm alone. I'm alone. You need to stay here because I'm alone. You know, I can't keep running away saying I'm alone when I have my sidekick with me. You leave. I'm going to go because I'm alone. And I'm going to prove I'm alone by leaving you here. And I want you to see that. He's alone. I don't know who his servant is. Some say it's Elisha. We don't know. Doesn't seem to be, but some people, I would say no, but I know some people who think it was Elisha. But it doesn't say that, and I don't lean towards that. But he wanted to be by himself because he felt like by himself, even when obviously he wasn't by himself. Because obviously we're never by ourselves, but depression is, I feel like I'm alone. I feel like I'm by myself. Verse 4. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat under a broom bush, and he prayed that he might die. He walks for a day by himself. Now, he is really by himself because he left his servant, and he goes, sits under a broom bush, his ties to, never mind, Jonah, and some other things happening. And he sits there, and it's too much. Take my life. I'm no better than my father's. You know, I've done all you want to do. Kill me. He's not going to kill himself. He's not despondent to the point of death. He's despondent to the point is I can't go on even though I know God is real. I can't go on even though I see God working in my life. I can't go on because I feel alone. Kill me. Kill me. I don't want to do this anymore. Successful ministry does not save me from depression. Successful ministry doesn't mean you won't have problems. Successful ministry can mean more stress than ever that touches your life. I'm no better than my fathers. Then he laid down and slept under the broom bush, in verse 5. And then behold, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He lays down, takes a nap. He's exhausted. He's emotionally exhausted. It's an emotional exhaustion. Even though God just answered by fire a few hundred miles north, but God did answer by fire, and everybody saw that he was God, and Elijah was the prophet of God. But now I'm alone. I'm going to take a nap. And an angel wake him up and said, get up and eat. God sent an angel to minister to him. And you have to see that. He was running away because of depression. It did not change God's attitude towards him. God was not angry. God was not upset. God was not going to punish him or teach him. He's a get up and eat. In the next verse 6, it says, so he looked in surprise. By his head there was a cake baked on the hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and laid down again. He said, look, you've worn yourself out. You're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and you feel like you're all alone. You need some strength. Take a nap. Wake up. Get something to eat. A little bit of nourishment. You need to be stronger here. You need to be stronger. You've gotten yourself down. Be stronger. Take a nap. Take a nap. All right? Next verse, so the angel came to him a second time, touched him and said, get up and eat because the journey is too much for you. He takes another nap. The angel word, look, your journey is much too difficult. It was his journey difficult because God had called him on a difficult journey? No. He took a difficult journey because he was depressed. He was not running away from God. He was running away from within himself because he was so depressed he couldn't do anything anymore. Even though he knew God was there, and God said, take a nap, now eat, get some straight, now take another nap, get and eat, because this journey is too difficult for you. He didn't say, by the way, you're not supposed to be down here, you're supposed to be up there. He said, you've gone over 1,000 miles, which is not true in Israel, it's probably 700 miles, from Carmel down to Beersheba in the south. Your journey's too difficult, you need to be strengthened. Have some food. Have some food, okay? So he gets strengthened in verse 8. He rose, ate, and drank, and in the strength of that meal, he was so supernaturally refreshed by eating what God had given him. 40 days and 40 nights he went into Horeb, the mountain of God. Hung a right and went into Egypt. Climbed on the mountain of God. Still moving away from what he's supposed to be calling to do, right? But God is still with him, trying to shore him up. You're alone. You need to be strengthened. You rest, get strengthened. Rest, get strengthened. Now go. And he goes into the mountain of God. A lot of people, I won't get into what a lot of people think about this. It's just do what the Bible says. And he goes into a cave. He goes into a cave. Good place to be alone, because you're alone, but at least you're not going to get rained on. And he goes in the cave, and he's all by himself. And he spent the night there. In other words, he slept. And behold, the word of Adonai came to him again. So God's going, I'm going to speak to you again. What are you doing here? You notice he didn't ask this on the journey. He just strengthened him so he could take the journey. Why? Because he needed the journey, and he needed the journey because he was in depression. He was fighting depression. And when you're in depression, God doesn't come to you and say, what are you doing there? First, you need to rest and strengthen yourself. And once you rest and strengthen yourself so you are refurbished in your inner being, God will simply ask, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Verse 10. And he lets it out. I have been very zealous for Adonai Tzvaot, the warrior God. He said, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, turned down your altars, slain your prophets' word. I alone am left, and they're seeking my life to take it. I'm all alone. I'm all alone. Don't you know what's going on? You want to know what I'm doing here? I'll tell you what I'm doing here. They killed everybody. Now they're trying to kill me. I'm all alone. I'm all alone. I'm hiding in a cave way down here. Wherever way down here is verse 11. He said, come out and stand before the mount of Adonai. And behold, Adonai was passing by a great and mighty wind, tearing a mountain, shattering a cliff before Adonai. But Adonai was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. But Adonai no, don't go. Go back if you can. Was not in the earthquake. So all these things start happening. All these things start happening. Great, mighty wind, tearing of the mountain, shattering cliffs. But that God's not there. A lot of things going on, but that's not God. Now the next verse, Johnny. 12. The earthquake of fire, and it was not in the fire. After fire, a soft whisper of a voice. A lot of flash, just like up on the mountain where he came with fire. A lot of flash. God's stepping back into his life. But God's not in the flash. That's not God. God is in the whisper, soft whisper of a voice. And God says, now that we've gotten all this other stuff out of the way, I want to speak to you. Verse 13. As soon as he heard it, he wrapped himself in the mantle, went out and stood in the entrance gate. All of a sudden, a voice addressed him and said, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? I want you to see something that he was there because of depression. See where I am. Got to see, he's battling a little bit of depression, not because he's not successful in ministry, not because he's not hearing from God. As a matter of fact, God is carrying him through this season of depression that God did not give him. He had it nonetheless. Things happen in our life that really pull us down, and we don't become despondent for life. We just get to the point where I'm so alone and nobody cares. And God will ask the same question over and over, but he'll strengthen us until we can get through. What are you doing here? Verse 14. And he said, I've been very zealous for Adonai's vote, for the children of Israel have forsaken you and your covenant, your altars, slain your prophets, and I alone am left. They're seeking to take my life. The same complaint. I'm still alone. You're here. I'm alone. And God said, that's okay because you're stronger now because I've strengthened you. And so verse 15. Adonai said, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Okay, you're strong enough now. You've wallowed in your depression enough. Now that I've strengthened you where you are, it's not a rebuke. Get back to your calling. Go back and replace Ahab with Hazael. Go. And while you're doing that, in verse 16, anoint Jehu, son of Nishmi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, the son of Shaphat, my Lord, as the prophet in your place. He's the only prophet. He said, you know what? You just tell Elisha he's the prophet now. Verse 17, I didn't read that yet. It shall come to pass when whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, because he's putting in a king who's going to kill people, Jehu will slay. Whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will slay. The battle continues. But you know what? You've done what you were called to do. You really can't go on. You really got yourself into a bad place, and you don't have to carry it any further. You've done enough. Let's move on. I no longer need somebody to make the people know there is a God. You have helped them to understand there is a God. It's time to a new season. You need a new leader. And God points out to him in the next verse, I have preserved 7,000 Israel whose knees have not bowed to Baal, whose mouth is not kingdom. You're alone. You're not alone. There's already another prophet ready to take your place, and there's still 7,000 people that are loyal, have always been loyal to me. And I chose Elijah, I chose Elijah because I identify with him. I planted this congregation in 1987. It was very successful. was very successful. And just before I was 27 years old. You need to know this. About every 5 years, I simply collapsed. I'm driven. I'm passionate, and I will go and go and go. And I averaged every 5 years, I collapsed, and I had to be given a month off to go reinvigorate myself. Not because I was despondent, not because God wasn't working. It's because of the stress of doing what is I consider a successful ministry, although I had to continually change, which is part of what ministry is about. And the board of directors 9 years ago, in their wisdom and generosity, said, let's give him a month off every 4 years, and maybe he won't burn out every 5 years. And the first time I had to wait 5 years because of the timing of it. And then last year, I was just holding on by my fingernails trying to get to my sabbatical. And some of you here saw it. I was struggling, not because I was doubting God, not because I was doubting the calling, not because God wasn't moving. I was in depression. I was feeling so alone. I told my wife, I feel like I'm pulling an ocean liner uphill and people are throwing anchors out on this side. And I feel so alone. You know, there it is. So God said, okay, let's go sit on a mountain for a month. Praise God, because I'm refurbished. And see, depression doesn't mean, I didn't have a chemical imbalance. I had an imbalance in my life out here. It's an imbalance. It happens to all of us. It happens to you. And in the letter of Jacob, which is James, in honor of King James, it's written 5:17. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. Elijah was just like us. He was a man with a nature just like us. He had a calling of God. He had a successful ministry. And he had to deal with depression that had nothing to do with God's plan in his life. But he had a nature like us. And it's easy for us to succumb to depression. You see, even when we have a hope of heaven, the pain on earth can weigh heavy on you. Even when you're living in God's grace, the darkness of depression can be very real. And we end up going from the mountaintop with God answering by fire to the cave where we're alone. And even when you cave into the darkness of depression, which is what it is. I'm running in a cave. I'm so by myself, but at least it's not raining in here. And you're hiding out. You're not really hiding out from God because you have faith. You know you're not hiding out from God. You're hiding out from everybody else because they don't get it and you're alone. No matter how much you feel alone, God is with you even in the darkness. He said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. How does this help? And I'll paint a picture, and I'm going to end pretty soon. I'm just going to sum this up. You feel the blues. You ever feel the blues? Do you know what it means to feel the blues? In the 17th century, you're out there sailing across the ocean. This is where this came from. And you're sailing across the ocean, the captain dies. And you're sailing, but you don't know where you're going now. So you're out on the ocean and you're moving, but you're not really sure where you're going very often because the captain died. And now, he's the only one that knew where we were going. And so you raise a blue flag up on the mast, or you paint a blue stripe on the front of your ship. And as you're sailing, you want others to know that you're not a threat, you just lost your way. I'm here, I don't know where we are, I don't know what we're coming near, I don't know where we're going, we're not a threat, we have just lost our way. We are blue. Because we have lost our way, and we need help so we can find our direction. The blues were picked by the I don't know, there's no good way to explain the barbarity of American slavery. But American slaves and liberated slaves sang the blues. Because a lot of them were raised by barbaric Christian masters who read the Bible to them, and they identified so strongly with Moses and the people of Israel who were mistreated and in slavery. They understood that, and they became believers, and they'd sing the blues. Go down Moses. They were blues. Why? Because they had lost their way. They were just trying to find direction. And see, that's what it is. See, depression is real. You need to know that. Let's just talk. Depression is real. There can be biological factors, and medication can help because you can have chemical imbalances that need drug treatment. That's very real. And that's something God has given us. But our depression problems often are beleaguered by the imbalances in the way that we live. Rick Warren, who actually made some corrections that a lot of people don't know because you haven't talked to him. I quote him, "If we're burning our candle at both ends, we're not as bright as we think we are." See, he built a real big church, then came to the realization they weren't believers. He was a very successful marketer to grow a large church. And I want you to know, he came to awakening. The vast majority of his people had no idea what it meant to be saved. And he did make that correction years ago. I talked to him. And here's what I want you to know. Be honest about how you're feeling. Because number one, if you struggle with depression, there is no quick fix. What I had to do is get away. I went up on a mountaintop with my wife, beautiful view, and the only time I left was to go and lift weights, and I just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. I lifted a lot of weights. I lifted weights every day. And I didn't wear my Star of David. I didn't want anyone to know who I was, although God used me nonetheless. And I want you to know something. When you're battling with things of depression, there's no quick fix. It's like, well, just feel better. Well, thanks a lot. You notice God didn't tell the prophet, just feel better. Take a nap, get refreshed. I'll get to you eventually. And when I get to you, I'm going to say, what are you doing here? But I'm not going to ask you until you're ready to hear that question. Just be real. You're not alone. It's okay not to feel okay. It's okay to not be okay. How you doing? I'm okay. I said, before my sabbatical last year, I was in bad shape. I seriously was considering going off on disability. I said, I just can't go on. I can't do this anymore. Not because God wasn't moving, not because I wasn't excited about what God was doing. It's like I just can't do this anymore. And the reality is I can't. And that's what God finally got to me. He took a month off in exercising. He said, okay, now get back there because you're not doing it. I'm doing it. It's like, oh, great. I knew that. But I had to have a month before he could tell me that. If you're going through something, it's real. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. And if you're not doing okay, you're not doing okay. And it's not a lack of faith. It's just that reality of sometimes I'm not doing okay. And sometimes you're not doing okay. If it's a chemical imbalance, get the right medication. The reality is, if your life is out of balance, God is with you to bring you through that time. He will never leave you or forsake you, and you will never be alone. Be blessed, everybody. Shabbat shalom. School of Breath is this afternoon, probably in about an hour. We'll let you know.